A widow spots her dead husband's identical twin brother and uncovers a dangerous art forgery conspiracy that threatens her son's life. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe for more stories. James? The name escaped Sarah's lips before she could stop herself, her shopping bags dropping to the sidewalk. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Yet there he was, or someone who looked exactly like him, striding confidently into the Westmore Gallery across the street, his familiar gait making Sarah's heart hammer against her ribs. "Mom? What's wrong?" Tyler tugged at her coat sleeve, his 8-year-old face scrunched with concern. Sarah couldn't find her voice. James Bennett had been dead for 18 months. The funeral, the grief counseling, the nights sorting through his belongings, crying over shirts that still held his scent. "I just thought I saw someone I knew," she managed. "Wait here by the bench, okay? Just for a minute." Before Tyler could protest, Sarah was crossing the street, dodging between cars that honked as she darted through traffic. The rational part of her brain screamed that grief was playing tricks on her, but she couldn't ignore what she'd seen. The Westmore Gallery was hosting an exhibition of contemporary European artists. Sarah scanned the room for the man. There, by a large abstract canvas in blues and reds, stood the figure that had her heart in a vice grip. From behind it was uncanny. The same broad shoulders. The same slight leftward tilt of his head when examining something. The same sandy brown hair with that stubborn cowlick at the crown. Then he turned and Sarah froze. It was James's face. The strong jawline. The slight crook in his nose from a college baseball injury. The thoughtful creases around his eyes. But there was something different, a hardness around the mouth that James had never had. Their eyes met across the gallery, and the man's expression shifted from mild interest to visible shock. For a suspended moment, they stared at each other while conversations hummed around them. "Dad." Tyler's voice shattered the moment. He had followed her inside and now raced toward the stranger, his face lit with joy and confusion. "Tyler, wait." Sarah lunged forward, but it was too late. Tyler had reached the man and was looking up at him with a mixture of hope and bewilderment. "Dad? Is it really you?" The stranger's face paled. He looked from Tyler to Sarah, who had caught up to her son and placed protective hands on his shoulders. "I'm sorry," the man said, his voice deep and controlled, but with an unmistakable tremor. "I think you've confused me with someone else." Up close, Sarah could see subtle differences. A thin scar near his temple that James never had. Eyes that were the same hazel but somehow colder, more guarded. "You look exactly like my dad," Tyler insisted, his small body tense under Sarah's hands. "Tyler, this isn't your father," Sarah said gently. "I'm so sorry, sir. My husband, he passed away and the resemblance is quite striking." The man's face had regained its composure, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Fear? "No harm done," he replied, taking a step back. "I get that sometimes. Just have one of those faces, I guess." A lot. Sarah knew it immediately. James had often joked about how distinctive his features were. "May I ask your name?" Sarah ventured, trying to keep her voice casual. The man hesitated, then extended his hand. "Nathan Reed. I'm in town consulting for the gallery on authentication of some pieces." His grip was firm, professional. Impersonal. Nothing like James's warm handshakes. Yet the hand was identical, right down to the slightly crooked pinky finger from an old break. "Sarah Bennett. And this is my son Tyler." At their last name, something indefinable crossed Nathan's face. Recognition? Sarah was certain of it. "Bennett," he repeated too carefully. "Well, it's been interesting meeting you both. If you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with the curator." He moved away with purpose, but Sarah noticed how his shoulders had tensed, how he glanced back once before disappearing through a door marked "Staff Only." "Mom, he looks just like Dad," Tyler whispered, his voice breaking. "Why did he pretend not to know us?" Sarah knelt to her son's level, brushing his dark hair, so like James's, from his forehead. "Honey, that wasn't Dad. I know it looked like him, but your father is gone. Sometimes people just look similar." Even as she said the words, Sarah knew she didn't believe them. The resemblance was too perfect. And Nathan Reed's reaction had been too pointed, too controlled. "Let's go home," she said, taking Tyler's hand. But as they left the gallery, Sarah glanced back at the staff-only door, a determination settling over her. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He had Dad's scar, Mom. The little one by his eye that he got from falling off his bike when he was 10. Tyler's words echoed in Sarah's mind as she paced their apartment that evening. After their encounter at the gallery, Tyler had become increasingly insistent that Nathan Reed was somehow his father. "But James never had a scar by his eye," she murmured, stopping at the mantel to pick up their wedding photo. James Bennett smiled back at her, handsome in his charcoal suit. Sarah traced his face with her finger, examining every detail she'd memorized years ago. No scar by his eye. Had Tyler imagined it? Sarah set down the photo and moved to the bookshelf, pulling out their wedding album. She flipped through pages of candid shots, searching James's face in every one. Nothing. Then she grabbed the box of family photos from the hall closet, scattering them across the coffee table. "What are you looking for?" Tyler stood in the doorway, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, a gift from James on his 6th birthday. "Just checking something, honey. Get ready for bed, okay? I'll be up in a minute." When Tyler retreated upstairs, Sarah continued her search. Baby pictures, vacation photos, holiday gatherings. In none of them did James have a scar near his eye. Sarah opened her laptop and typed Nathan Reed Art Authenticator into the search bar. Several articles appeared, most mentioning him as a consultant for galleries and auction houses. A few photos showed him at exhibition openings, always in the background. His online presence was minimal. No social media accounts, no personal website, just sparse mentions in art world publications dating back only about 10 years. Before that, nothing. Sarah clicked through to an image from a gallery opening in Chicago. Nathan stood beside a painting, his expression serious as he spoke to an interviewer. There it was, the small scar near his right temple that Tyler had noticed. She pulled up another photo of James. The similarities were undeniable. They could have been the same person except for that scar and something indefinable in the eyes. Twins? Sarah whispered. But James had never mentioned a twin. He described himself as an only child, his parents long deceased. William Bennett, his adoptive father, had never mentioned another child. Sarah grabbed her phone and scrolled to William's number. Her finger hovered over the call button before she set the phone down. William had been distant since James's death. If there were secrets about James's past, confronting William directly might close doors before she found answers. Instead, Sarah opened the drawer of James's desk, a space she'd avoided for months after his death. She pulled out folders of documents, tax returns, their marriage certificate. Sarah paused, frowning. Where was James's birth certificate? She remembered filing it here alongside their other important documents. She moved to their bedroom, opening James's nightstand drawer. Beneath a stack of books was a small notebook she'd never seen before. The pages contained handwritten notes in James's distinctive scrawl. Called State Registry again. No record found. W says original was lost in move. Birth hospital closed in '95. Records sent to county archive. W evasive when pressed about birth parents. Claims all records destroyed in fire. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before James's car accident. Meeting with PI tomorrow. Told W I'm going to Chicago for work. Sarah's hands trembled. James had been investigating his own past and keeping it from everyone, including her. Had he discovered something that led to his death? The official report had ruled the car crash an accident, but now doubt crept in. She returned to her laptop, searching for news about James's accident. The articles were brief, noting that art dealer James Bennett had died when his car went off a road in rainy conditions. No witnesses. No suspicion of foul play. A text message alert broke her concentration. Stop digging. You're putting yourself and Tyler in danger. Unknown number. Sarah nearly dropped the phone. She rushed to check that the doors were locked, then peered out the windows. The street was empty, but the shadows suddenly seemed deeper, more threatening. Should she call the police? And tell them what? That she'd seen her dead husband's doppelganger and received a threatening text after finding out her husband had secrets? They'd dismiss her as a grieving widow hallucinating connections. Sarah sank onto the couch, her mind racing. James hadn't been who he claimed to be. Nathan Reed's appearance was no coincidence. And now someone was warning her away from the truth. She picked up her phone again and took a deep breath before typing a reply to the unknown number. Who are you? What do you know about my husband? The response came almost immediately. Your husband is dead. Let him stay that way. Sarah stared at the words, a cold determination settling over her. Whoever had sent this message didn't know her very well. They didn't understand that threatening Tyler was the surest way to make her fight harder. Mom? Tyler called from upstairs. Are you coming? Be right there, sweetheart, Sarah called back, her voice steadier than she felt. Tomorrow she would return to the Westmore Gallery. Tomorrow she would confront Nathan Reed properly. And this time she wouldn't let him walk away without answers. "You're not supposed to be in here, Sarah?" William Bennett's voice startled her, echoing through James's old office at the Bennett Gallery. Sarah turned to find her father-in-law standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the corridor light. At 73, William still cut an imposing figure with his silver hair and penetrating blue eyes so unlike James's hazel ones. "I'm looking for some of James's old files," Sarah said, straightening. "Gallery paperwork that might help me understand some investments he made." The lie came easily. She couldn't tell William about seeing Nathan Reed or the threatening text message. William's gaze swept over the desk where Sarah had been searching. "I can have Diane compile those for you. No need to waste your afternoon." "I don't mind," Sarah replied, watching him carefully. "It helps me feel connected to him still." Something flickered across William's face, sympathy or guilt, she couldn't tell which. "Take what you need then," he said after a pause. "I have a meeting. Lock up when you leave." He hesitated, then added, "Sarah, whatever you're looking for, sometimes the past is better left alone." Before she could respond, he was gone, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Sarah returned to her search, more determined than ever. James had worked at his father's gallery for years before opening his own small dealership. If there were secrets about his past, traces might remain here. She ran her fingers along the underside of the antique desk, remembering how James had once mentioned a hidden compartment. Her fingertips found a small irregularity, a button disguised within the wood grain. She pressed it, and a soft click revealed a narrow drawer beneath the right-hand row of regular drawers. Inside lay a manila envelope, yellowed with age. Sarah's hands trembled as she carefully emptied its contents onto the desk. A birth certificate, not James's but one for a baby boy Doe, born at St. Catherine's Hospital in Chicago, May 15, 1982, the same date as James's birthday. Adoption papers showing William and his late wife Margaret adopting an infant from St. Catherine's. And most startling of all, a photograph, its edges worn from handling. The photo showed two identical baby boys lying side by side in hospital bassinets. On the back, written in faded ink, "My sons, May 1982. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, sinking into James's chair. Twins. James had been a twin, and William had only adopted one of the boys. What? Beneath the photograph was a handwritten letter, the paper thin and delicate. "Dear Mr. Bennett, I cannot keep them both safe as you requested. The agreement was for one child only. I've made arrangements for the other boy as discussed. He will be well cared for, but you must never attempt contact. The danger remains too great. Remember your promise. Mr." Sarah's mind raced. Mr. Could that be connected to Nathan Reed? A newspaper clipping fell from between the pages of the letter. A small obituary dated June 1982. Margaret Reed, 34, died unexpectedly on May 30th. She is survived by her husband, Michael Reed. Private services were held. Reed. The same surname as Nathan. The coincidence was too great. Sarah photographed every document before carefully replacing them in the envelope and returning it to the hidden drawer. As she pressed the drawer shut, she noticed a business card that had fallen to the floor. Elliot Parker, private investigator. On the back was a handwritten note in James's writing, "Meeting Tuesday, 2 p.m. Tuesday, the day James died." Sarah slipped the card into her pocket and gathered her belongings. As she left the office, Sarah felt eyes on her. She turned to find Diane, William's assistant of 20 years, watching her. "Find what you needed?" Diane asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "Just some old invoices," Sarah replied with a forced smile. "Nothing important." "William seemed concerned about your visit," Diane remarked. "He's always been protective of James's things." Sarah nodded non-committally, eager to escape the gallery. Outside, Sarah breathed deeply, trying to calm her racing heart. She pulled out her phone and searched for Elliot Parker, private investigator. His office was across town. Without allowing herself time to reconsider, she ordered a rideshare. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood outside a modest office building. The directory listed Parker Investigations on the 3rd floor. The office door was unlocked. Inside, a small reception area sat empty. A voice called from the inner office, "Be right with you." A middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard appeared, his expression shifting from professional welcome to surprise as he saw Sarah. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, recognition immediate in his voice. "I've been wondering if you'd come." "You know who I am?" Sarah asked, taken aback. Parker nodded grimly. "Your husband showed me your picture." He gestured toward his office. I think it's time we talked about what James found before he died. Your husband wasn't just looking for his birth parents, Mrs. Bennet. He was trying to uncover why he was separated from his twin brother. Elliot Parker's words hung in the air of his cluttered office as Sarah sat motionless, processing everything the investigator had told her. James had hired Parker 3 months before his death, initially to find information about his adoption. What he discovered instead was evidence of a twin brother and a deliberate separation. Did James learn who his brother was? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Parker shook his head. We were close. I traced records to a private adoption facilitated by someone named Margaret Reed, but the trail went cold after her death. The day of our last appointment? He paused, his expression darkening. James called to say he'd found something critical in his father's records and was bringing it to me. He never arrived. The accident? Sarah murmured. Maybe. Parker's tone suggested he had doubts. Single-car accidents on clear days are convenient ways to silence people. Sarah felt a chill. You think someone caused the crash? I think you should be careful, Parker replied, handing her his card. James was worried enough to give me your photo and ask me to contact you if anything happened to him. I waited after his death, watching to see if anyone approached you. When no one did, I decided it was safer to keep my distance. William Bennett's home stood imposing against the darkening sky as Sarah rang the doorbell. After leaving Parker's office, she picked up Tyler from his friend's house and dropped him at her sister Kate's for a sleepover. This conversation couldn't wait. The door opened to reveal William, surprise evident on his face. Sarah, this is unexpected. We need to talk, she said firmly, stepping past him into the marble-floored entry hall. William led her to his study, the wood-paneled walls lined with art books and rare first editions. He poured himself a scotch without offering Sarah anything. I know about James's twin, Sarah stated without preamble. I know you separated them as infants. William's hand trembled slightly as he set down his glass. For a moment he looked every year of his age, the confident art dealer facade cracking. You found the drawer, he said, not a question. Why, William? Why separate identical twins? Why keep it from James his entire life? William sank into his leather chair. To protect them both. From what? From whom? He corrected. Richard Hayes. The name meant nothing to Sarah. Who is Richard Hayes? A very dangerous man who once controlled much of the underground art world in Chicago. William's voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. Margaret Reed worked for me at my first gallery. She became involved with Hayes, not knowing what he was. When she tried to leave him after discovering she was pregnant, he threatened to kill her and the child. Children, Sarah corrected. She was carrying twins. William nodded. She came to me for help. I had connections, resources. I helped her disappear, change her identity. When the boys were born, Hayes was still searching for her. We knew he'd never stop. So you split them up, Sarah said, the pieces falling into place. One boy went to you, James. And the other? To Margaret's brother, Michael Reed. He moved to the West Coast, changed his name too. William's eyes looked haunted. It was the only way to ensure Hayes couldn't find them. If he found one boy, at least the other would be safe. And Margaret? She died shortly after childbirth. Complications. William's voice broke slightly. She made me promise to keep the boys separated and safe. Did James know any of this before he died? No, William said quickly, too quickly. At least I never told him. But he'd been asking questions, digging into his adoption records. The day he died, he was meeting with a private investigator. Sarah watched William's face carefully. He'd found something in your records. William paled visibly. Sarah, you need to stop this investigation. No, Hayes is still alive. Still dangerous. If he learns that James had a son, a flesh and blood connection to Margaret, he won't hesitate to use Tyler to hurt those he thinks betrayed him. Is that a threat? Sarah demanded, rising to her feet. It's a warning, William countered, his voice suddenly urgent. Hayes had sources everywhere. If you've been asking questions about James's past, about his brother, word could already have reached him. James is dead, Sarah said. What does Hayes care about ancient history? Hayes doesn't see it that way. In his mind, Margaret betrayed him, took his children. I helped her. The debt remains unpaid. William stood, gripping Sarah's arm. For Tyler's sake, let this go. Sarah pulled away. James was investigating this when he died. You really expect me to believe that was a coincidence? Believe what you want, William said, his voice hardening. But remember, you're not just risking your life. You're risking Tyler's. Sarah's hands shook as she unlocked her front door. William's warning repeated in her mind. Was she putting Tyler in danger by pursuing the truth? As she stepped inside, something felt wrong. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it, yet different somehow. Sarah moved cautiously through the rooms, flipping on lights. In the kitchen, she noticed the window above the sink was unlocked. She always kept it locked when they were out. Heart pounding, she continued to Tyler's bedroom. Nothing seemed disturbed. Her own room looked untouched as well. Then she entered her home office and froze. The desk drawer where she kept important documents hung open slightly. Sarah was certain she'd closed it. With trembling fingers, she pulled it open all the way. The files were in perfect order, too perfect as if someone had gone through them carefully and replaced everything precisely. On top lay a small object that hadn't been there before. A toy soldier, meticulously painted, identical to ones Tyler had in his collection. The message was clear. Someone had been in their home. Someone who knew about Tyler. Sarah snatched up her phone to call Parker, then hesitated. Instead, she dialed her sister. "Kate? It's me. Is Tyler okay?" She listened to her sister's reassurances, relief washing over her. "Good. Don't tell him, but can he stay with you tonight? Maybe tomorrow too? I'll explain later." After hanging up, Sarah stared at the toy soldier in her palm. William's warning hadn't been exaggeration. Someone was watching them, someone who had no qualms about breaking into their home. The question remained, was it Richard Hayes? Or was someone else trying to scare her away from the truth about Nathan Reed? "You should file a police report, Sarah." Detective Olivia Parker set down her coffee mug, her shrewd brown eyes studying Sarah across the cafe table. Olivia had been Sarah's friend since college and had joined the Boston PD 12 years ago. Breaking and entering is a serious offense. And tell them what? Sarah kept her voice low. That someone broke in without leaving a trace, rearranged my papers and left a toy soldier? They'll think I'm paranoid. Maybe, Olivia admitted. But at least there'd be a record if something else happens. She leaned forward. What aren't you telling me? Sarah hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed Olivia the photo of Nathan Reed from the gallery's website. This man. He's identical to James. Olivia's eyes widened as she studied the image. That's uncanny. A relative you didn't know about? His twin brother, Sarah said quietly. Separated at birth. I found documents in William's office. James discovered the truth just before he died. You think this is connected to the break-in? Olivia's detective instincts were engaged now. I think it's all connected. James's accident, this man appearing now, the break-in. Sarah took a deep breath. William claims the boys were separated to protect them from their biological father, a man named Richard Hayes who was involved in art crimes in Chicago decades ago. Olivia sat back. Richard Hayes? I know that name from art theft seminars at the academy. Major player in the forgery scene in the 80s and 90s. Never convicted. Is he still around? Far as I know. Semi-retired, but his network is supposedly still active. Olivia's expression grew serious. Sarah, if Hayes is involved, you need to be careful. These aren't amateurs. I need to know more about Nathan Reed, Sarah insisted. He's connected to the Westmore Gallery. Can you help me? Olivia sighed. Give me a day. But promise me you won't do anything reckless. The Westmore Gallery was hosting a private viewing the following evening. Sarah hadn't been invited, but Olivia had pulled strings to get her name added to the guest list. As Sarah entered the elegantly lit space, she felt conspicuous in her black cocktail dress. Her eyes scanned the room for Nathan Reed, but he was nowhere to be seen. Instead, she spotted Cynthia Westmore, the gallery's owner, holding court near a striking abstract painting. Quite magnificent, isn't it? A voice beside her commented. Sarah turned to find an elderly man with piercing eyes examining the same painting. It's captivating, Sarah replied diplomatically. Harrison Miller, the man introduced himself. Art collector and enthusiast. Sarah Bennett. Miller's eyebrows rose slightly at her name. Any relation to William Bennett? Of the Bennett Gallery? My father-in-law, Sarah admitted. Ah, you must be James's widow. I was sorry to hear of his passing. Miller's gaze sharpened. I'm surprised to see you here. The Westmores and the Bennetts have been rivals for years. Just expanding my horizons, Sarah said lightly. Actually, I was hoping to speak with Nathan Reed. I understand he authenticates for the gallery. Something flickered in Miller's eyes. Reed is particular about who he works with. Brilliant authenticator though. Including you? Sarah asked. Miller smiled enigmatically. Let's just say I owe him a debt of gratitude. Ah, speak of the devil. Nathan Reed had entered the gallery, looking striking in a tailored suit that James would never have chosen, darker, more severe. He moved confidently through the crowd, stopping to speak briefly with Cynthia Westmore. If you'll excuse me, Sarah murmured to Miller, who nodded with a curious expression. She approached Nathan obliquely, stopping to examine paintings along the way. When she finally stood beside him, pretending to study a landscape, he stiffened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Bennet? He acknowledged without looking at her. I was wondering if you'd return. You remember my name. Interesting for someone who claims we're strangers. Your son called me Dad, in a public gallery. It made an impression. His voice was controlled, but Sarah caught an undercurrent of tension. I need to speak with you privately, she said quietly. I don't think that's wise. It's about your birth mother, Margaret Reed? Nathan's head turned sharply, his eyes, so like James's, boring into hers. For an instant raw emotion flashed across his face before the mask slipped back into place. 10 minutes, he conceded. Outside. Back entrance. 15 minutes from now. Sarah's phone vibrated. A text from Olivia. Found something. Call me ASAP. She stepped into a quiet corner of the gallery and dialed. Nathan Reed's life only goes back 15 years, Olivia said without preamble. Before that, nothing. No school records, no employment history, no credit report. A new identity, Sarah murmured. Gets better. The Westmore Gallery has been under investigation 3 times for suspected forgery. Each time, Nathan Reed provided authentication that cleared them. But I talked to a contact in art crimes. They think Reed isn't just authenticating, he's selecting which forgeries are good enough to pass. He's part of the forgery ring? Sarah's mind raced. Maybe. But here's the kicker. Hayes has been spotted at Westmore events. And my source says he and Reed have been seen leaving together. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Hayes is Nathan's father. If they're working together... Sarah, get out of there. Now. I'm meeting Nathan in 10 minutes. He reacted when I mentioned Margaret Reed. He knows something. Sarah. I'll be careful. I'll call you right after. Sarah ended the call and made her way around the gallery, keeping Nathan in her peripheral vision. He excused himself from conversations and slipped toward a hallway marked Staff Only. Sarah waited 30 seconds, then followed. The hallway led to a service entrance. Nathan stood waiting, silhouetted against the dim security lighting. I know who you are, Sarah said, keeping her distance. I know about Margaret Reed, about the twins being separated. James was your brother. Nathan turned slowly. James Bennett died 18 months ago. Your twin brother died, Sarah pressed. He discovered the truth just before his accident. An accident I'm now convinced wasn't accidental at all. You should stop this investigation, Nathan said, his voice flat. For your sake and your son's. Was that you in our apartment? Leaving the toy soldier? Something flashed in Nathan's eyes, surprise then anger. I haven't been near your home. But if someone left you a warning, you should heed it. William says your biological father is dangerous. That he's still a threat. Nathan's laugh was bitter. William Bennett has been lying to you for years. To James too. Don't be so quick to trust his version of events. Then tell me yours, Sarah challenged. A sleek black car pulled up at the curb beyond the courtyard. Nathan checked his watch. Our time's up. Wait, Sarah started, but Nathan cut her off. If you want to protect your son, Mrs. Bennett, forget you ever saw me. Forget about Margaret Reed and Richard Hayes. Some truths are too dangerous to uncover. He moved past her toward the waiting car. As he opened the door, Sarah caught a glimpse of the passenger, an elegant older man with silver hair and cold eyes that sized her up in an instant. The door closed and the car pulled away, leaving Sarah alone in the courtyard with the chilling realization that she had just seen Richard Hayes, the man who might have ordered her husband's death, and who now knew exactly who she was. DNA testing takes time, Olivia cautioned. And we'd need Nathan Reed's DNA to compare against Tyler's. I know. And we'd need his consent, which he'll never give. Sarah rubbed her temples. Unless what? Unless we get it another way. Sarah picked up her phone and opened the gallery's website. The Westmore Gallery is hosting a charity event tomorrow night. Champagne reception. A glass Nathan Reed might drink from, Olivia finished, understanding dawning. Sarah, that's not exactly legal evidence. I don't need it for court. I just need to know for myself. Olivia frowned. Even if you confirm he's Tyler's uncle, what then? Confront him again? The man who might be working with Richard Hayes. I have to know the truth about James, Sarah insisted. Nathan is the key. He knows why James was killed. We don't know James was killed, Olivia reminded her gently. I know, Sarah said, her voice hardening. And deep down, so do you. The charity event was crowded with Boston's elite. Sarah had borrowed an expensive dress from her sister and styled her hair, hoping to avoid immediate recognition. Olivia waited outside in an unmarked car, communicating with Sarah via a tiny earpiece. Target at your 2 o'clock, Olivia's voice came through. By the sculpture garden entrance. Sarah glanced in that direction. Nathan Reed stood conversing with a museum curator. He held a champagne flute in one hand, gesturing with the other as he spoke. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah circulated through the event, always keeping Nathan in her peripheral vision. Finally, he placed his empty champagne flute on a tray near a large fern arrangement and excused himself, heading toward the restrooms. Sarah moved quickly, retrieving the glass and slipping it into the specially prepared bag Olivia had given her. She had just tucked it into her clutch when a voice behind her made her freeze. Quite the persistent widow, aren't you? She turned to find Harrison Miller, the elderly collector she'd met at the previous gallery event. His eyes twinkled with amusement, but there was something calculating behind them. Mr. Miller. I didn't expect to see you here. I rarely miss an opportunity to observe art and people. His gaze flickered to her clutch. Particularly people with unusual interests in certain art authenticators. Sarah's heart raced. Had he seen her take the glass? Nathan Reed is a fascinating individual, Miller continued. Appeared in the art world seemingly from nowhere 15 years ago, yet possesses extraordinary knowledge of artistic techniques. You sound like an admirer, Sarah said carefully. An observer, Miller corrected. Just as you appear to be. Though perhaps with different motivations. He leaned closer. Did you know your late husband came to see me, about 3 weeks before his unfortunate accident? Sarah's breath caught. What? He had questions about certain paintings that had passed through the Bennett Gallery years ago. Paintings authenticated by his father, William. Miller's voice dropped lower. Paintings that he suspected were forgeries. Before Sarah could respond, she spotted Nathan returning to the main gallery. I have to go, she said abruptly. Miller smiled enigmatically. Of course. But Mrs. Bennett? Be careful who you trust in this world. Even blood can betray. It's a match, Olivia confirmed, sliding the lab report across the table in the quiet corner of the cafe they'd chosen for the meeting. Nathan Reed is definitely Tyler's biological uncle. The DNA markers are unmistakable. Sarah stared at the paper, a strange mix of vindication and dread washing over her. So what now? Now, Olivia said, we call Nathan Reed and demand answers. Sarah shook her head. No. I need to face him alone. Somewhere public but private enough to talk. The Boston Public Garden was busy enough to feel safe but spacious enough for privacy. Sarah sat on a bench near the swan boats, watching as Nathan approached precisely on time. He wore casual clothes today, jeans and a navy sweater that made him look achingly like James on weekends. You said you had evidence, he stated without greeting, remaining standing. Something I needed to see. Sarah handed him the DNA report silently. Nathan scanned it, his expression changing from skepticism to shock. He sank onto the bench beside her. How did you get my DNA? He asked, but the question seemed automatic, his mind clearly elsewhere. Does it matter? It confirms what you already knew. You're James's identical twin. Nathan stared at the paper for a long moment before speaking. I only learned about James 2 years ago. I was raised as Nathan Morris in Seattle by people I thought were my parents. When they died in a car accident 5 years ago, I found adoption papers. It took years to trace my birth mother to Chicago, and then to Margaret Reed. And to Richard Hayes, Sarah added pointedly. Nathan's eyes snapped to hers. Hayes is a dangerous man. That's why I approached him carefully, why I've been working to gain his trust. He doesn't know who I really am. You expect me to believe you're not working with him? That it's some kind of undercover operation? Believe what you want, Nathan said, echoing William's words from days earlier. But it's the truth. I came to Boston tracking Hayes's art forgery network. That's when I discovered the connection to the Bennett Gallery and to James. James was investigating forgeries too, Sarah said. Before he died. Nathan nodded grimly. I know. We never met, never knew about each other. But we were on the same trail from different directions. James was discovering that his father's gallery had been laundering forgeries for Hayes for decades. I was tracing Hayes's current operation, which led me to the Westmores. And you think Hayes had James killed when he got too close to the truth? I know he did. Nathan's voice hardened. That's why I've been working to get evidence against him. For a murder that hit closer to home than I ever imagined. Sarah studied his face, so like James's, yet marked by different experiences, different pain. Why should I trust you? Nathan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small pendant on a chain. Because of this. I found it among Margaret Reed's belongings. There were 2 of them, baby gifts, the record said. Sarah's breath caught. James had worn an identical pendant his entire life, never removing it. She'd always assumed it was a simple family heirloom. James had the other one, she whispered. We were separated to protect us, Nathan said quietly. But Hayes never stopped looking. When James started investigating art forgeries connected to William, he unknowingly put himself in Hayes's path. And now I've done the same thing, Sarah realized. The break-in at my apartment was Hayes's people, Nathan confirmed. They've been watching you since you started asking questions. The toy soldier was their signature warning. What do we do now? Nathan's eyes, James's eyes, met hers with a determination she recognized. We finish what James started. We expose Hayes and William both. But first we need to make sure Tyler is safe. Hayes knows about him now, and he won't hesitate to use a child as leverage. Sarah felt a chill run through her at the thought of Tyler in danger. Why would he care about a grandchild he never knew? Because Hayes doesn't just want to silence those who threaten his operation, Nathan said grimly. He wants to control what he sees as his legacy. His bloodline. Tyler, Sarah whispered, already reaching for her phone to call her sister. Tyler's safe at my parents' lake house in Vermont, Sarah said, ending the call with her sister. Kate's staying with him. No one knows about the place, we haven't been there in years. Nathan nodded, glancing around the small hotel room that had become their makeshift headquarters. Maps and printouts covered one wall, connected by colored strings. Olivia had helped them secure the room under a false name after Sarah explained the full situation. Good. Now we can focus. Nathan pinned another document to the wall. A transaction record from the Bennett Gallery showing the sale of a rare Degas to Hayes 15 years ago. This is where it started for James. He found irregularities in the gallery's records going back decades. Sarah paused at a folder labeled simply SD9. Inside were photos of paintings, all masterworks, all sold through the Bennett Gallery over a 20-year period. What's SD9? She asked, showing Nathan the folder. His eyes narrowed. Special Division 9. It's an FBI art crimes unit. Very secretive. He took the folder, examining the contents. These are all suspected forgeries that were never confirmed. He looked up sharply. Where did James get FBI case files? A knock at the door silenced them. Nathan motioned for Sarah to stand aside as he approached the door cautiously, hand near the inside pocket of his jacket. It's me, Olivia's voice came through. I've got someone with me. Nathan and Sarah exchanged glances before he opened the door. Olivia entered, followed by a tall, stern-looking woman in a tailored suit. This is Special Agent Monica Reynolds, Olivia introduced. FBI Art Crimes Division. Special Division 9, Nathan said, not a question. Reynolds studied him, then Sarah, her expression revealing nothing. I understand you've been making inquiries about Richard Hayes and certain art forgeries. Dangerous questions that get people killed. Like my husband, Sarah said bluntly. Reynolds nodded once, a tight acknowledgement. James Bennett was working with us. The confirmation hung in the air. Sarah felt her knees weaken slightly as she sank into a chair. He was an informant? More than that, Reynolds clarified. He approached us 18 months ago with evidence that his father's gallery had been laundering forgeries for a major criminal organization. We recruited him for an undercover operation. Operation that got him killed? Nathan said, his voice hard. Reynolds turned to him. The accident was suspicious, but we couldn't prove murder. Not then. She gestured to the wall of documents. But it seems James left breadcrumbs for someone to follow. Why are you telling us this now? Sarah demanded. Why not after he died? Because we couldn't be sure who was involved, Reynolds said frankly. William Bennett was under investigation. For all we knew, you could have been complicit. Sarah recoiled as if slapped. You thought I helped get my husband killed? We didn't know, Reynolds replied unapologetically. This operation spans decades, involves multiple galleries and some of the wealthiest collectors in the country. Trust is a luxury we couldn't afford. She turned to Nathan. Including trusting a man who appeared out of nowhere and has been working closely with our primary target. Nathan's jaw tightened. I've been investigating Hayes for personal reasons. Yes, the long-lost twin angle. Quite the coincidence. Reynolds' skepticism was evident. It's been confirmed by DNA, Olivia interjected. Nathan is James's identical twin. Reynolds absorbed this, her expression softening fractionally. That explains some inconsistencies in our surveillance. We spotted you near Hayes several times over the past year and initially thought James had faked his death. James was close to something big before he died, Reynolds continued. He'd connected Hayes to an international forgery ring operating through 3 major galleries, including the Bennetts and the Westmores. William and Hayes go back decades, Sarah said, showing Reynolds the files from the hidden drawer. William helped Margaret Reed hide from Hayes when she was pregnant. That's why the twins were separated. Reynolds examined the documents with professional interest. This fills in some blanks. We knew William Bennett and Hayes had a falling out in the early 80s, but not why. The theory was a business dispute. It was personal, Nathan said. Hayes thought William had stolen the woman he considered his property, along with his unborn children. And decades later, he discovered one of those children was investigating him, Sarah added. That's why James was killed. Not just because he was getting close to exposing the forgery ring, but because Hayes realized who he was. Hayes had evidence of William's involvement in Margaret's disappearance, Reynolds explained. He used it as leverage to pull William into his operation. And William chose his reputation over his son's life, Sarah said bitterly. We don't know that for certain, Reynolds cautioned. The question is, did William know Hayes had discovered James's identity? There's one way to find out, Nathan said grimly. We confront William directly. Too dangerous, Reynolds shook her head. William is under surveillance. If you approach him, Hayes will know. What if that's what we want? Sarah suggested, an idea forming. What if we use me to draw them both out? Absolutely not, Olivia protested. Hear me out, Sarah insisted. Hayes already knows I'm investigating. What if I approach William openly, demand to know the truth about James's death? Make it public that I have evidence connecting both of them to forgeries. You'd be painting a target on your back, Reynolds warned. I already have one, Sarah countered. But if Hayes thinks I'm about to go public with what I know, he'll have to act. And you'll be waiting. It's too risky, Nathan argued. Which is exactly why he'll make a move, Sarah said firmly. And when he does, we'll have him. Reynolds considered this, her professional assessment evident in her eyes. It could work with proper preparation. But you'd need to wear a wire, have backup. Official means warrants and paperwork, Nathan pointed out. Word could get back to Hayes. Then we keep the circle small, Reynolds decided. Just this room. Off the books until we have enough to move officially. She fixed Sarah with a serious look. Are you sure about this? Hayes has killed before to protect his operation and his secrets. Sarah thought of Tyler, safe but missing his home and normal life. She thought of James, whose quest for truth had cost him his life. She thought of the twin brothers, separated at birth, who never had the chance to know each other. I'm sure, she said, her resolve hardening. Let's finish what James started. The Bennett Gallery was closed to the public, a discreet sign indicating a private event. Sarah entered alone, her heart pounding despite the wire taped securely beneath her blouse and the knowledge that Nathan, Olivia, and Agent Reynolds were monitoring from a van parked across the street. William Bennett looked up from his desk as Sarah was escorted in by Diane. His face showed a flicker of surprise before settling into careful neutrality. Thank you, Diane. That will be all. The assistant hesitated, glancing between them before reluctantly withdrawing. As the door closed, William gestured to a chair. I didn't expect to see you here, Sarah. Especially since you've been avoiding my calls for days. Sarah remained standing. I've been busy learning the truth about my husband's death. William's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened almost imperceptibly around his pen. I already told you to stop digging. For Tyler's safety. Stop. Sarah cut him off. No more warnings, no more half-truths. I know everything, William. About James working with the FBI. About the forgeries. About Hayes being the twins' biological father. William went very still. For a moment he looked like he might deny it all, but then the facade cracked. The powerful art dealer seemed to age before her eyes, shoulders slumping as he gestured again to the chair. Please sit, Sarah. This time she did, keeping her back straight, eyes fixed on her father-in-law. How much do you actually know? William asked, his voice quieter now. I know you helped Margaret Reed disappear when she was pregnant with Hayes's twins. I know you kept one baby, James, and gave the other away. I know Hayes blackmailed you into laundering forgeries through your gallery. And I know James discovered this before he died. William closed his eyes briefly. Yes, that's mostly accurate. Mostly? The parts that aren't accurate are the ones you've filled in with assumptions. William opened a drawer and withdrew a small key. He rose stiffly and moved to a painting on the wall, a mediocre landscape that Sarah had always wondered why he displayed. He removed it to reveal a small wall safe. What I'm about to show you I've never shown anyone. Not even James. William opened the safe and removed a worn leather journal. Margaret's diary. She left it with me for safekeeping in case anything happened to her. Margaret wasn't just any woman to Hayes. She was his art authenticator, the best he'd ever found. She could spot a forgery instantly, a gift Hayes exploited to build his criminal empire. William returned to his seat. She was also the only person he ever truly loved in his own twisted way. Sarah opened the journal, seeing elegant handwriting filling its pages. She worked for him willingly? At first, she thought he was just a passionate collector. By the time she realized what he really was, she was already in deep and pregnant. So she came to you for help. William nodded. We'd met at art conferences. I knew her professionally. When she showed up at my door terrified, explaining what Hayes had done and what he was capable of, I couldn't turn her away. You helped her disappear. Margaret knew Hayes would never stop looking for her, or for his children once they were born. She was the one who suggested the separation. William's voice cracked slightly. She believed that if the twins were raised apart, with different names, different lives, Hayes would never find them both. It was the only way to ensure at least one child would remain safe. So you took one, Sarah said, and who took the other? Michael Reed, Margaret's brother. He moved to Seattle, changed his name to Morris. Took the boy and disappeared. William's eyes grew distant. The plan was to reunite them when Hayes was no longer a threat. But he never stopped being a threat. Why keep James's adoption secret from him his entire life? Protection through ignorance. If James didn't know about his brother, about his birth parents, he couldn't accidentally lead Hayes to the truth. William looked down at his hands. Margaret died days after the births, not from complications as I told you before, but from Hayes. He found her hospital room. She'd already arranged for the twins to be elsewhere, and she died refusing to tell him where they were. A chill ran through Sarah at the calculated cruelty. And you still made deals with this monster? After he killed her? He found me a year later with evidence I'd helped hide Margaret. Threatened to destroy me, my family, my gallery. I made a devil's bargain. I would authenticate certain paintings for him, and he would leave Margaret's children alone. But you never told him about James. Never. As far as Hayes knew, I had helped Margaret and that was all. William's face hardened. For 30 years I kept that bargain. Authenticated forgeries, turned a blind eye to where they came from. Ruined my professional integrity piece by piece, but kept my son safe. Until James started investigating forgeries. William nodded, pain evident in his eyes. He found inconsistencies in old gallery records. Started asking questions. I tried to steer him away, but James was persistent. Like his mother, Sarah said softly, glancing down at the journal. When he told me he was going to Chicago on business, I knew. Somehow he'd found a trail leading back to Margaret. I tried to warn him without revealing everything, but he'd already gone to the FBI, Sarah finished. Surprise flickered across William's face. You know about that? I told you, William. I know everything. Sarah leaned forward. What I don't know is whether you told Hayes about James. Whether you sacrificed your son to protect yourself. The accusation hung in the air between them. William's face drained of color. I would never, he whispered, voice shaking. James was everything to me. Everything I had left of Margaret and the promise I made her. Then how did Hayes find out? How did he know to target James? William shook his head, genuine bewilderment in his expression. I don't know. I've asked myself that question every day since the accident. Someone must have tipped him off, but it wasn't me. William reached into the safe again and removed a small flash drive. I've kept records, Sarah. Insurance. Every forged painting Hayes has moved through my gallery for 3 decades. Every transaction, every buyer. He placed the drive on the desk between them. I was a coward when James needed me. I won't make that mistake again with his son and his brother. Sarah took the drive, tucking it into her pocket. The FBI will want to speak with you. I know. William looked suddenly very old. I'm ready to pay for what I've done. For Margaret. For James. His eyes met Sarah's, filled with regret and determination. And for Tyler and Nathan. As Sarah stood to leave, William asked quietly, "Does he look like him?" "Nathan, I mean. Does he look like James?" "They're identical," Sarah replied softly. "In appearance at least. I'd like to meet him someday. If he'd allow it." "Maybe," Sarah said. "When this is over. When this is over." The words seemed to hang in the air as she left the gallery, a different kind of tension now building. Hayes was still out there. The most dangerous player was still in the game. And Sarah had just collected the evidence that could destroy him. "We've got him," Agent Reynolds said, removing her headphones as Sarah returned to the surveillance van. "William's testimony combined with the evidence on that drive will be enough for warrants." Nathan studied Sarah's face. "You believe him? That he didn't betray James?" "I do," Sarah replied quietly. "Whatever his other sins, he loved James." "We need to move quickly," Olivia interjected. "Once we take this to the bureau officially, word could leak." Reynolds nodded. "I'll have a team ready by morning. Until then, you all need to stay out of sight." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Tyler's asking to talk to you. Okay to call?" "I need to call Tyler," Sarah told the others, stepping away for privacy. As she dialed Kate's number, rain began to fall, streaking the van windows and casting the street in a gloomy twilight. "Mom?" Tyler's voice came through, instantly lifting her spirits. "Hey buddy. How's the lake house?" "Boring," Tyler complained. "When can we go home?" "Soon," Sarah promised. "Just a couple more days." "That's what you said before," Tyler pointed out with the relentless logic of an 8-year-old. "And I forgot Mr. Biggles. He's probably lonely." Sarah smiled despite herself. Mr. Biggles was Tyler's favorite stuffed penguin, left behind in their hasty departure. "I'm sure he's fine. He's very brave, remember?" "I guess." Tyler sounded unconvinced. "Aunt Kate says we can't go back for him because it's not safe. Are the bad people still at our house?" Sarah froze. "What bad people, Tyler?" "The ones you're hiding from. Aunt Kate was talking to Uncle Rob about it. She didn't know I was listening." Sarah's heart raced as she caught Reynolds's concerned gaze through the van window. "Tyler, did Aunt Kate say anything specific about these bad people?" "Just that they were looking for something Dad had." Tyler's voice lowered conspiratorially. "Is it a treasure map? Like in the movies?" Before Sarah could respond, Kate took the phone. "Sorry about that," Kate said. "He overheard Rob and me talking." "Kate, has anyone contacted you? Asked about us?" "No, nothing like that." Kate hesitated. "But Rob thought he saw someone watching the house yesterday." "Probably nothing, but I'd feel better if you told us what's going on." "I can't explain everything now, but we're handling it," Sarah assured her. "Just stay alert and call me immediately if anything seems off." After ending the call, Sarah rejoined the others, relaying what Tyler had said. "They could have followed your sister when she took Tyler to Vermont," Nathan suggested grimly. "Or they're fishing trying to draw you out," Reynolds countered. "Either way, we need to move your family. Now." The safe house was a modest apartment in Cambridge, secured by the FBI for sensitive cases. As Reynolds made arrangements to extract Kate and Tyler from Vermont, Sarah paced anxiously. "Something feels wrong," she said to Nathan, who was checking the street below through a narrow gap in the blinds. "I know," he agreed. "This is too easy. Hayes wouldn't just wait for us to build a case against him." "Maybe William tipped him off," Olivia suggested from her position by the door. Nathan shook his head. If William wanted to warn Hayes, he wouldn't have given Sarah the flash drive. Sarah's phone rang, an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Sarah Bennett?" A professional female voice she didn't recognize. "Yes. This is Boston Memorial Hospital. We have your son, Tyler Bennett, in our emergency department." The world seemed to stop. "What? That's impossible. He was brought in 20 minutes ago following a car accident. He's asking for you." "Who brought him in?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising enough to alert the others. "His aunt, Catherine Walsh. She's being treated for injuries as well." Sarah's mind raced. Kate had been with Tyler at the lake house just 30 minutes ago. There was no way they could be at Boston Memorial already. "This is a trap," she whispered, covering the phone. Nathan immediately took out his own phone and dialed Kate's number while Reynolds moved closer to listen to Sarah's call. "Ma'am? Are you there?" the caller pressed. "Yes," Sarah managed. I'll come right away." "What room is he in?" "Emergency room 3. The doctor will meet you at the entrance." Sarah ended the call just as Nathan shook his head. "Kate's not answering." "Call the Vermont State Police," Reynolds ordered Olivia. "Have them check the lake house immediately." "It's Hayes," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "He's trying to lure me to the hospital." "Or he actually has them," Nathan said grimly, making everyone fall silent. "We can't take that chance." Reynolds nodded. "I'll scramble a team to Boston Memorial." "But Hayes would be expecting that." "He's not expecting me," Nathan said. "If I go in first, he'll think I'm James. It might buy us enough time to determine if Tyler and Kate are really there." After tense discussion, they agreed to Nathan's plan. Reynolds would position agents around the hospital while Nathan went inside. Sarah would remain at the safe house with Olivia until they confirmed whether Tyler was actually there. The waiting was unbearable. Sarah jumped at every text message, every update from Reynolds. The Vermont police had found the lake house empty but undisturbed. Kate's car was gone. "They could have left voluntarily," Olivia suggested, trying to sound hopeful. Just then Sarah's phone rang, Nathan's number. She answered immediately. "It's a trap," he said without preamble, his voice low and urgent. "Tyler and Kate aren't here. Hayes's men are—" A sudden crash interrupted him, followed by shouting and what sounded horribly like gunshots. "Nathan!" Sarah cried. The line went dead. Olivia was already on her radio, alerting Reynolds about gunfire at the hospital. Sarah stood frozen, phone still pressed to her ear, when a text came through from Kate's number. "Come alone to the Westmore Gallery. Back entrance. 1 hour. Bring what James found or the boy dies." Attached was a photo of Tyler, terrified but unharmed, holding today's newspaper. "They have him," Sarah whispered, showing Olivia the text. "Hayes has Tyler. Reynolds will organize a rescue operation," Olivia insisted, already making the call. "There's no time," Sarah argued. "An FBI raid could get Tyler killed." "So could you going in alone," Olivia countered. Another text arrived, this one from an unknown number with a video attachment. Sarah played it with shaking hands to see Nathan on the ground, bleeding from what appeared to be a shoulder wound as men in dark clothing dragged him into a vehicle. "I have to go," Sarah said, a strange calm settling over her as shock gave way to determination. "But I need to get something first." "What?" "What James found. The thing that got him killed." Sarah grabbed her coat. "It wasn't in the hidden drawer or his office. It's somewhere only I would know to look." Their apartment felt alien as Sarah entered cautiously, Olivia covering her from the hallway. Everything was as they'd left it, the break-in having disturbed nothing visible. Sarah moved directly to Tyler's room, to the penguin stuffed animal sitting on his bed. Mr. Biggles, the toy Tyler had specifically mentioned missing. "Tyler said he forgot Mr. Biggles, but he never goes anywhere without him," Sarah explained to Olivia as she picked up the stuffed animal. "He was trying to tell me something." Sarah examined the toy, finding a small incision in the back, nearly invisible among the black fabric. She reached inside and felt something hard, a small USB drive. James knew they might search his office, his computer, Sarah realized. So he hid it where no one would think to look. In a child's toy, Olivia marveled. In the one thing he knew I would protect at all costs. As they hurried back to the car, Sarah gripped the drive tightly. "This is what Hayes wants. What got James killed. Then it's our best leverage to get Tyler and Nathan back alive," Olivia said, starting the engine. Sarah nodded, a plan forming. Hayes thought she was a grieving widow and over her head. He didn't realize she had the FBI behind her, and more importantly, he didn't know that she had discovered the truth about his past, about the twins, about everything. Hayes had tried to frame her, to manipulate her through those she loved. Now it was her turn to set a trap of her own. "Are you sure about this?" Agent Reynolds asked, adjusting the bulletproof vest beneath Sarah's sweater. "We can still find another way." "There is no other way," Sarah replied, her voice calm despite the fear coursing through her. "Hayes expects me to come alone. If he sees FBI, he'll kill Tyler and Nathan." They stood in a surveillance van a block from the Westmore Gallery, where the darkened windows revealed no signs of activity despite the late hour. Reynolds' team had established a perimeter, hidden from view but ready to move on her signal. "The moment you confirm Tyler's location, give the signal," Reynolds reminded her. "Don't try to negotiate. Don't try to be a hero." Sarah nodded, touching the nearly invisible earpiece. She had both USB drives in her pocket, William's evidence and the one from Mr. Biggles. Together they contained enough to destroy Hayes completely. The question was whether she'd live long enough to see it happen. "I need 5 minutes with Hayes before you come in," Sarah said. 5 minutes to make sure Tyler and Nathan are safe." Reynolds looked like she wanted to object again but finally nodded. 5 minutes. Then we move, with or without your signal." Sarah stepped out of the van, walking the final block alone. The gallery's back entrance was unlocked, just as the text had instructed. She entered a darkened hallway that led to the main exhibition space, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The main gallery was dimly lit, spotlights highlighting selected paintings that seemed to watch her progress like silent witnesses. At the center of the room stood Richard Hayes, elegant in a tailored suit despite the late hour. Beside him was a terrified Tyler, Hayes's hand resting on the boy's shoulder in a possessive gesture that made Sarah's blood boil. "Mrs. Bennett," Hayes greeted her, his cultured voice at odds with the coldness in his eyes. "Right on time." "Where's Nathan?" Sarah demanded, stopping several feet away. Hayes gestured to a side door, where two men dragged a semi-conscious Nathan into view. His shoulder was bandaged crudely, his face bruised, but his eyes found Sarah's with a silent warning. "The prodigal son returns," Hayes commented, studying Nathan with unsettling intensity. "Or should I say, the stolen son." "Let Tyler go," Sarah said firmly. "He's just a child. He has nothing to do with this." "On the contrary." Hayes's hand tightened on Tyler's shoulder. "He has everything to do with this. My grandson. My legacy." The possessive tone made Sarah shudder. "I brought what you wanted," she said, taking out both USB drives. "Everything James found plus William's records. Every forged painting, every transaction, every buyer." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "William betrayed me? After all these years?" He seemed genuinely surprised, even hurt. "You killed his son," Sarah replied coldly. "Did you expect loyalty?" "James's death was regrettable," Hayes said, his tone suggesting it was merely a business inconvenience. "He was my son too after all. But he made his choice when he went to the FBI." "How did you find out?" Sarah asked, buying time as she saw Nathan slowly straightening, gathering his strength. "Diane," Hayes replied with a thin smile. "William's trusted assistant has been on my payroll for years. She noticed James accessing certain files, making copies. She alerted me immediately." "So you had him killed?" Sarah could barely contain her rage. "You had your own son's car tampered with." Hayes shrugged elegantly. "Family can be disappointing. But now I have a chance to start again." He looked down at Tyler. "A new generation raised properly this time." "You're insane if you think I'll let you near my son," Sarah said, her hand tightening around the drives. "You misunderstand the situation, Mrs. Bennett. You are not in a position to let me do anything." Hayes nodded to one of his men who raised a gun toward Nathan's head. "The drives, please. Then perhaps we can discuss visitation rights." Sarah took a step forward, then stopped. "Let me say goodbye to my son first." A flicker of something, perhaps genuine emotion, crossed Hayes's face before he nodded. "1 minute. No tricks." Sarah approached slowly, kneeling before Tyler, whose eyes were wide with fear. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm scared." "I know, baby," she whispered back, pulling him into a hug that shielded him from Hayes's view. "But it's going to be okay. Remember what we practiced? The fire drill?" Tyler nodded against her shoulder, instantly understanding. "When I say now, you run to that exit," she murmured, indicating the door behind her with the slightest nod. "Don't stop, don't look back. Agent Reynolds will be waiting." Sarah stood, keeping Tyler slightly behind her as she faced Hayes again. "Here are your drives," she said, holding them out. As Hayes reached for them, Sarah suddenly shouted, "Now!" Several things happened at once. Tyler bolted for the exit as Sarah had instructed. Nathan lunged forward despite his injuries, tackling one of Hayes's men. Sarah threw the drives into Hayes's face, momentarily blinding him as she spun to ensure Tyler reached the door. Gunshots rang out. Sarah felt a searing pain across her arm but kept moving, pushing Tyler through the exit before turning back to see Hayes aiming a small pistol at her. Before he could fire again, the gallery doors burst open as Reynolds and her team stormed in, shouting commands. Hayes's men dropped their weapons, but Hayes himself seemed frozen in rage, the gun still trained on Sarah. For a suspended moment, father and daughter-in-law faced each other across the gallery floor. Hayes, the embodiment of calculated evil, Sarah standing firm despite her bleeding arm. "It's over, Hayes," Reynolds called out. "Drop the weapon." "You've taken everything from me," Hayes said to Sarah, his voice oddly calm. "Just like she did." "Margaret tried to protect your sons from what you are," Sarah replied. "I'm doing the same for your grandson." Something shifted in Hayes's eyes, a dark acceptance. Sarah saw his finger tighten on the trigger and braced herself, but the shot never came. Instead, another gunshot echoed through the gallery, and Hayes collapsed, a red stain spreading across his chest. Behind him stood William Bennett, holding a small revolver with shaking hands. "For Margaret," William said quietly. "And for James." 3 months later, Sarah sat on a bench in the Boston Public Garden, watching Tyler feed the ducks. His nightmares had finally begun to subside, though he still asked questions about that night. Questions Sarah answered with age-appropriate honesty. "He's resilient," Nathan commented, joining her on the bench. His arm was no longer in a sling, though he still favored his right side slightly. "Like his father." "Like both his uncles," Sarah corrected with a small smile. The weeks following Hayes's death had been a whirlwind. William's testimony, combined with the evidence from both drives, had dismantled Hayes's forgery network completely. William himself had received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation, though his reputation in the art world was irreparably damaged. "Have you decided what you'll do with the gallery?" Nathan asked, watching Tyler. Sarah nodded. "Turn it into a non-profit art education center. Use Hayes's seized assets to fund scholarships for underprivileged kids." "James would have loved that," Nathan said softly. "I think so too." Sarah hesitated before asking, "Have you decided about Seattle?" Nathan had received an offer to head a new art authentication department at a major museum there, a chance to use his skills legitimately, to build a life away from the shadows of Boston. "I'm still considering it," he admitted. "But I'd miss my family here." Family. The word had taken on new meaning these past months. Tyler had bonded with his uncle, finding in Nathan pieces of the father he'd lost. And Sarah had found in Nathan not a replacement for James, but a bridge to him, a connection that helped keep James's memory alive. "Whatever you decide," Sarah said, "we'll still be family." Tyler ran up, breathless with excitement. "Mom, Uncle Nathan, can we go to the dinosaur museum again? Please?" Sarah laughed, ruffling his hair. "Maybe next weekend, buddy." As Tyler ran back to the pond, Nathan asked the question he'd been circling for weeks. "How much will you tell him? About James, about Hayes, about all of it?" Sarah watched her son, seeing James in the way he moved, the way he laughed. "The truth," she said finally. "Not all at once and not the darkest parts until he's older. But the truth about who his father was. A man brave enough to stand up against corruption, even when it meant confronting his own family history. And about Hayes? Someday I'll tell him his grandfather was a troubled, dangerous man who made terrible choices. But I'll also tell him that his father and his uncle were better men despite their origins, not because of them." Sarah turned to Nathan. "We get to choose our own legacy. James chose integrity. You chose justice. Tyler will make his own choice someday." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Tyler chase a squirrel up a tree. The autumn sunlight filtered through the changing leaves, painting everything in warm gold, a different kind of masterpiece than the ones that had nearly destroyed their lives. "James would be proud," Nathan said finally. "Of all of us." Sarah smiled, tears pricking at her eyes as she watched her son, James's living legacy, running freely in the sunlight, safely beyond the shadow of secrets that had claimed his father's life. "Yes," she agreed softly. "I think he would."